Here we
All
go.
right, Ron,
I'm back, baby. I'm back.
look at that.
Thanks
Better
for
than
having me
ever.
back.
Yeah, no problem. It's good to be able to do another one of these. It's been quite a while, so
Yeah.
it's gonna be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I always feel like it's so funny. I'm like, who cares, right? Like you're doing such a great job with yours. I love yours. I saw the I was gonna say Prince, but no, like the Sting one recently, like, right? Like you're doing great. And then, but I kind of do when like the videos or podcasts that I listen to, I'm like, yeah, like I miss the peeps, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
So I missed you all too. I missed all the viewers.
awesome.
Yeah. How you been?
Been doing pretty good, like you said. Just trying to kind of, every now and then pump out the occasional video. As the ideas come. Like the most recent one, obviously, was on the Synchronicity album, just because that's one. It's an album that meant a lot to me as a teenager because it was the one that kind of finally steered me away from. I was always like a second generation Beatles and Monkees fan, and that with the ascension of MTV got me more into more contemporary music, and then it just really kind of cracked open from there. But also, it's the 40th anniversary of that album, so it was a good timing to be able to discuss that and all my early memories with that, because that was also my first concert experience, was actually to be able to see the Police, at what at that time turned out to be their final tour until many years when they reunited. So very cool.
Where did they play? Like, where did you see them? What venue?
The old Comiskey Park here in Chicago.
Cool.
And it was the tour opener. On top of all that, it was actually the tour opener, and it was a big day of MTV was there in full force, and we had a support bill of like Flock of Seagulls, The Fix, Joan Jett. It was like MTV day, because all the VJs were there, Martha Quinn. In fact, there's a famous video that in any Police documentary you always see it, of where she's trying to interview the three members of the Police backstage, and they've always had that testiness with each other, and Stewart, the drummer, is kind of like, hey, how would you like to see me beat up Sting? And Sting like throws a cup of water at him, and then it just all hell breaks loose and stuff like that. So that was from right there, but in behind the Comiskey Park area. So
yeah.
So yeah, it was very, very cool. I have great memories of that day, and of course, with that being like your first concert experience, that sets the bar very high. Because they've still remained one of my all-time favorite groups.
They were the headliners, though, right? Like that's
absolutely, because that was the summer of Synchronicity, and that was like, as far as pop bands go, that's when they really hit that upper echelon. They've been growing and growing and growing, like each album's very steadily. Only 5 albums of output. And Synchronicity was the one that really finally took them over that major finish line to that super rarefied era, where they were basically like considered the Beatles of their era at that time, So
and you brought up something I really like, that it's like when that time where music became yours, right? It was like you were perfectly in alignment with what was going on contemporary, or like what the contemporaries were, right? Like, so Sting, that was your band. Like, I'm saying that was sorry, the Police was your band, like, and you were right there. You were at the age to like accept it, make your own. Or prior to that, it was just kind of hand me downs.
yeah. It was all, like I said, a second generation. And of course, you can't do better than the Beatles as far as like a second generation thing. But it's a different thing to like experience a band like that in your time, and it helps you understand, like really what the impact of these things are if you have your own version of it. So
Bon
awesome.
Jovi,
And then sadly, shortly
for
after
me.
that, they go and break up. So
right. It's Bruce, you just have bad luck, I guess. I don't know. What'd you do to them?
These guys, they have a notorious history, and because I've covered that in the past, and anyone who's a Police fan knows. But thankfully, I do point out in the Synchronicity video that at least all those first generation Police fans got the one thing that first generation Beatles fans never got, and that was an actual tour reunion, which that was always one of those groups that I really, really thought we'd never see it, because Sting had become so big, he didn't really need to do it. And again, with how the relationships had been, particularly between him and drummer Stuart Copeland, these alphas. So when it was announced, I mean, I was just, through the roof and stuff like that. And actually saw that show 3 times during its entire run. One in your neck of the woods, as a matter of fact, and over there by Red Rocks. So
very cool.
Yeah. So it was awesome. And, they were as great as ever. They kind of, it was a kind of a different, it wasn't that quite the coked up intensity of the 80s,
Right.
but it was still very musically interesting. And I feel like did, they did it justice. They did not embarrass themselves, which is always the potential for bands reuniting. So.
Oh, that's cool, man. Well, okay, I tell you what. Let's dive right into this to our thing because because I'm like, we're talking about like we're going to talk about singers today. And so it's like when you're hitting up Sting, I'm just like, oh man, like so obviously a front runner for an amazing singer, right? Like so obviously like up there with the upper echelon of best singers. Who for you, Bruce, our topic today are some of the most underrated?
Underrated singers. Well, we'll get to. I mean, I don't know if we can get into the list right away because I mean I have a combination of singers and pop groups, but
Yeah,
there's a few that I think it's like there's one on my list that I do think as just a singer alone. I'll just give you this hint. I think he was one of the best singers of the late 70s and throughout the 80s that I still to this day don't ever see him really singled out as one of the great singers. So there's a few. It's a combination of, like I said, groups and singers. And there's like several on there that I also think for just the singing element don't quite get the appreciation. And I think a lot of the people on my list, it's really going to be more people who, as I said, I think we'll end up titling this video like guess misjudged pop stars or pop stars done dirty. Because as we know, critics can be wrong, and in these cases, for me, reading the contemporary press at the time of these guys, a lot of it, I'm like, you look at back on it now, and it's like it's an embarrassment because now several of these people have since become like either legendary or Hall of Fame, legit Hall of Famers and stuff like that. So it goes to show you, anyone out there who's a performer, singer, whatever, don't listen to your critics or like your worst critics. It's keep it all in context.
But are the guidelines that they were done dirty? Like is for our list, it's that they were done dirty.
It can either be done dirty or just like maybe underappreciated, underrated, those kinds of things. I guess in my mind, I do think maybe not necessarily done dirty, but they definitely, I think we're not given like their full due. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
In their time.
Well, let's dive right in. What are we waiting for?
All right. Well, we'll count them down, and I'll give you my number 5.
Let's hear it. Number 5.
And this is going to be someone that actually falls, I think, into more that like kind of heartthrob category. And I know you have one that's we're going to kind of parallel each other a little bit with this because I know who we're going to get to with you in a bit. But this would be Rick Springfield.
Oh, yeah.
And Rick Springfield, he's someone who has an interesting career trajectory because he's someone that started in Australia in a band called Zoot, kind of like a pop rock group, young studs, and, who actually had a bit of a following there. And then he decides to come to America, to try his luck here, become a star. Group breaks up. He comes to the States in the 70s, and that turns into like a long sort of fallow period for him because immediately, of course, you kind of remember what Rick looked like back then, right? So he's like prime, heartthrob teen idol material. And that's kind of what they tried to pigeon him into. Like basically all of the early press on him was the next David Cassidy kind of thing. Yep. Even though as a writer, he had a different energy to him. So there was always a disconnect with that. So for him, it was a long struggle where, he's trying to kind of make this music career happen in the 70s. And for whatever reason, label mismanagement, manager, just a whole bunch of different things. It just was not aligning for him throughout most of the 70s. And then finally, you have like punk and like the new wave energy breaking through. And he's inspired by that, as a writer. So what he decides to, as a struggling performer and actor, he does little bit parts here and there. But he likes this energy of like, the sort of the post-punk stuff of Elvis Costello, early Police we were talking about. So he decides, hey, if nothing else, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write some songs that I can perform in a small combo, right? And I can just perform those songs anywhere and just do this music that I like. And that album eventually becomes what we know now as the Working Class Dog album, which is his big breakthrough. And it's all punchy, succinct power pop. And at the same time as that, he also gets that, this part in General Hospital, which that show out of nowhere becomes that particular year that he's on it that summer, that was like all the rage, you know, among college campuses and, you know, younger people. It
Yeah.
wasn't just like the blue hairs that he thought. He's like, oh, what? I can go on the show. It's not going to impact my music career. I'll just safely do that. No, that thing was everywhere. So it was like this double fueled rocket ship of the General Hospital thing, and then Working Class Dog, with, of course, the standout single Jesse's Girl really
Yeah.
taking off. And that gives him that sort of meteoric rise in the 80s, you know. But even then, throughout that tag of like the soap opera actor, it kind of, you know, I think it tampers some of his credibility. I think at least with serious rock critics and stuff like that. Even though I think, like, you know, you got Working Class Dog as an album, uh, Success Hasn't Spoiled Me Yet. I mean, he has a run of really, really good records. And you know, the thing that I was really impressed by was on cable, they had aired one of his live concerts that I think was from 1981. And, you know, seeing him perform, I was like, this guy is legit.
Yeah.
And if you see him now to this day, that's kind of what he's brought forth, you know, and he's built sort of the resurgence of his career on, is he's just a legitimately strong live performer. You know, he's a very, very, you know, super competent guitar player, especially for someone who you consider just a pop idol. And he's, you know, he's got it. You know, he definitely has
Yeah.
that legitimate thing, instead of just being like, had he been just like a soap opera actor jumping on the rock treadmill, you could see that he started as a musician first and just rode the wave of whatever break he could get.
Because that do you remember Michael Damian?
Sounds very familiar. Yeah.
It's similar thing where he was like on one of the soap opera. I don't remember all the details, but he's on one of the soap operas, and he had like a decent like pop career in the 80s. And yeah, like great voice, but same thing. Yeah, like so, but he didn't sustain like Rick Springfield. Like Rick Springfield has been pretty prolific over the years, right? Like he's around.
Yeah. Yeah. He, you know, for a bit, you know, because he's also famously in his autobiography talked about, like, also he was struggling with depression, which that didn't become really public until his autobiography. And so, you know, he was one of those, and I think Sting had talked about it for him too in the past, that these were guys who were hoping that fame was going to sort of kind of
Make it
heal,
okay. Yeah.
yeah, make it okay, and make the, you know, all that stuff. And they were both devastated to find out that it, when once they finally broke through, that it didn't. You know, and I know Sting, you know, a lot of the, again, the themes of Synchronicity is him struggling, that you, a lot of existential, you know, for a pop album, there's a ton of existential angst on it if you actually read the lyrical content. And for Springfield, the same thing. He actually took a long break from performing, where he just couldn't, you know, face the idea of, you know, being kind of back in the public eye for a long time, until, you know, finally he starts kind of getting better and then gets the itch. And then from there, you know, there's that resurgence. And of course, the goodwill returns, you know, from an audience that had missed him and stuff like that. And so, you know, from then on, you know, he's been a consistent, and he's been putting out really good, consistent albums in recent years as well, you know. So his talent has sustained them too. And he still looks phenomenal, you know, like for his age, you know, super fit. I mean, he's held up well, and
Yeah.
you know, like I said, I've seen him live a couple times, and he's really, really good.
That's awesome. Yeah, those guys are, dude, that's great. Like I love that. I love hearing that. I love when I love when they're able to like do the thing that they love. You know, it's inspiration for all of us, right? Like
Yeah,
if they're
and
able
when you
to
hear a
sustain.
story like that too,
Right.
like real struggle, real kind of, you know, no bullshit, you know, it's like, hey, man, you know, there's a very human side to all of these people, you know, but these are the, you know, their extraordinary talent, you know, obviously helps them push through, but you know, they're dealing with the same, you know, crises, or, you know, lack of confidence that, you know, so many of us do. So
And we were just talking about this before we got on the call too. I love stories when it's like it's kind of like parodied now in biopic movies, or in like parody biopic movies. But when it's like when there's like they hit rock bottom, it's just not working. Their agents drop them, the label drops them, and then they write that one song just from the heart, and they're like, "I'll play this in a small venue, I don't care." And then it's like, you know, like that's the
yeah,
we all
and you
dream
know,
of that.
and for Rick, it was getting dicey because he was hitting his early 30s, and it's like, oh, is this ever going to happen, kind of thing. So I love those kind of defying the odds stories. So
Yeah.
yeah, I always give him a lot of credit for you know, pulling through the wilderness, and you know, seeing his dream through. You know, which is again, like you say, inspiring for all of us.
Yeah.
So how
Awesome,
about for
man.
you, Ryan? You're number 5, man.
Okay, so my number 5 toggles between two, and I would, you know, as always, I wish I was as brilliant and comprehensive, and might add, ridiculously good looking as Bruce. Um, it's a dream of mine someday, but
We can all dream.
we could all dream the impossible dream. I wish so. Yeah. So like for me, I took the assignment to kind of go like, who for me is someone that I'm like, they just resonate with me as a vocalist, as a singer, as a performer. Um, Not necessarily groundbreaking in terms of writer or
Mhm.
even known for the band, but just in terms of like honestly, like, man, I wish I had that voice, you know, like I wish
Yeah.
I right or like I would go see that in concert and just to hear that voice and the expression and the emotion. And so number five toggles for me between two kind of pop and it's uh Adrian Zemed, who I always talk about.
Yeah.
I'm like embarrassed about because I
You're like the lone YouTube champion for Adrian Zemed.
I know, and like YouTube's not even into Adrian Zemed. Like I will look up, I'm like looking up Adrian Zemed concerts, and he has like this like little like cabaret show in Vegas, you know,
Yeah.
like, and I'm like, how is this guy not more successful? And I just remember a few years back, he was on Scott Baio's reality show.
Really?
Scott Baio had a reality show of all these like 70s, like Danny Bonaducci probably was on it. I don't know, I'm just kidding, but like
Yeah.
right, like, but it was like a bunch of these old school pop idols from the 70s and 80s that
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
do you know what I'm talking about? They try to like get them back to
Yeah.
work. And I remember an episode where Agents of Med, they were trying to get him to do something like PR style, like where like something silly or whatever. And he's like, I don't want to do this. He's like, I'm happy singing on cruise ships.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that is like power to you, man. If that's what you want to do, like great. Like I get it. But like I was like, no, I want
Isn't
more.
that crazy that you see him greater than he sees himself?
I know. That's how I'm like embarrassed to even bring him up. So I'll say, okay, that's like five, and then 4.5 is Donny Osmond because
Yeah.
that motherfucker is legit. Like, so I like Donny Osmond to me, and he's sustained. I mean, he's been around forever, like, right? But like kid performer, comes from a family of performers, right? And then he goes through like his, you know, Donnie and Marie phase as kids. They have their show and
Mhm.
everything, and then it's like the world just hates him. They're like, we're done. They turn their
We're
back
done
on
with
him.
Don.
Done with Donnie, right? Like Donnie's
Yeah.
lame, and it was like this collective, and like I would say like probably like early to mid '80s. There's this
Mhm.
decision to like back away from him, and I'm like, why? His voice is sick, like his intonation, his placement, like the quality, the timbre. He has that perfect kind of like, I don't know, it's like it's just that voice does everything. Like he can do rock, he can do pop, he can do musical theater, like he can do whatever he wants, you know. And he's
Yeah.
just a good showman. And so like I go like, why didn't he do Greatest Showman? Like, why did they give it to Hugh Jackman? You know what I mean? Like someone like Donny Osmond, I just think can do it, but he's like lame. Like it's just he had this like
It's an
moniker.
image problem.
He had an image problem, and supposedly what got him back into like I remember there's a he had a hit song, and they like didn't want to admit that like radio the DJs and stuff didn't want to admit that it's Donny Osmond.
Yeah.
And then like, but the song was such a hit that like it kind of brought him back, right? Like, and
Yeah.
he did like for 2 years, he did a tour of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat,
That's right. Yeah.
like all over the country, and that got him like favor
It was
somehow.
huge.
It was
That
huge,
was huge for him. Yeah.
yeah. But it's like so funny touring in a musical was huge for him, like this headliner, you know. But he did. I saw it, man. I had a friend who was in the show, and he was phenomenal. Like he was just
Yeah.
amazing. You can't stop
Or you
watching.
can't beat the experience. I mean, no, regardless of what you think of image and all that stuff. I mean, you're talking about someone who,
Yeah.
by that point had the same experience as Michael Jackson, as a performer, as a young kid and all
Yeah.
that stuff. I remember all that Osmond Jackson 5 thing, and
Yeah.
the stuff. So yeah, I mean, for nothing else, I mean, it's like you can't sort of beat the experience. And we may kind of down the theater thing because obviously he could have probably continued more in a pop vein and stuff like that. But he also is someone I think custom made for musical theater, really. I mean, maybe on a big stage, but I think he's well suited for that.
He's well suited for it, but like when you see like, I think musical theater is very limiting because when you like, I watch like YouTube videos of his Vegas shows, and it's just like, I mean, it is everything I loved about old Vegas or like the '80s. Growing up in the '80s, like I loved The Rock. but not Dwayne Johnson, but I'm saying, like, I love the rock scene, right?
I'm smelling what you're cooking, Ron. Don't worry.
Thanks, my brother. Thanks, Jabroni. But like with 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 Donnie, like it exemplifies that, like, when we'd watch I grew up in Australia in the 80s, and so we'd watch the show Young Talent Time, these variety shows where it's like dancing and singing and like Footloose, and like everything was like so all encompassing, where it was singing and dancing and you had to be funny, and like Donnie does, still, like, he brings that in his Vegas shows now. And like, again, like, maybe it's not cool, but like it's awesome. It's just to watch someone who's so talented and so full of life and vibrant. Like, I love it. So like even now his voice still quality. He's still headlining in Vegas. Like, I think right now he's doing a show. I follow him on Instagram. And I'm such a fan of this guy. He's so positive. He's not angsty. He doesn't, so it's like I get made fun of for being a Superman fan.
Yeah.
Whereas like my buddy growing up was always like, like into the Batman, into the angst and all that. And like, that's cool. Like, power to you. I want it, like, I'm divorced. There was a pandemic. I'm a single dad. Like, I just want shit to be easy. You know what I mean? Like, with my entertainment, I want it to be soothing and calming and fun, and
Affirmative, yeah.
yeah, and that's what Donnie brings. So that's my number 5.
Fair enough, man. Fair enough. So, all right, number 4. My number 4. And this will get to someone who I was talking about earlier, as far as like I consider underrated pop singer.
Yeah.
Part of a duo, probably the most successful pop duo of all time. That is Hall & Oates.
Oh yeah, represent.
And Hall & Oates is another one, actually piggybacking off of the Donny Osmond thing. It's kind of, I think it's more always been like in its time among critics, probably more of an image problem than anything else, right? Because again, the videos were always a little bit questionable, and like I said, it was always a little bit of like an image problem. But I still, to this day, and I don't hear enough people talking about it, is I really still think that Daryl Hall is one of the best pop singers of the late 70s and throughout the 80s. His mother was a singer, so he grew up, he was properly trained and all of that. So his pitch, intonation, just phrasing, and his gift for melody and hooks and all of that, along with obviously John Oates, as a songwriting duo. But I think he's greatly underrated as a singer. If you ever watch his live from Daryl's house stuff, where it's just him and his house band, and they'll have a guest and stuff like that, and that's all just live. He's a phenomenal singer. You throw in the fact that such a great writer, that string of hits. What I guess am heartened by is that if you ever go to like the down the rabbit hole of like YouTube reaction videos, Hall & Oates is probably one of the most probably one of the top acts that are reacted to on YouTube. And again, it'll be sort of it'll be hip hop, people who are into hip hop, or just millennials or Gen Zs doing these videos without free of all the historical context. They don't care about what critics think. They barely even know who the members of the band are. They're discovering these songs, and the songs always go over well. With the Hall & Oates stuff, they love this stuff. So the songs have sustained, and Hall & Oates is one of those acts that whatever was said within its time, they're now legit Hall of Famers. So again, they've sustained, but I still think to this day, Daryl Hall doesn't get the credit as a vocalist that he does. There should be people really, really singing his praises, because he was one of the best, without question. Could do this, the Philly blue-eyed soul thing as well as anyone who ever did it.
Yeah. All right. I love that. Okay. So similarly, number 4, it's coming. My guy, David Cassidy.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring this up is because I think, like, I remember I lived in the western suburbs of Chicago in 2011, 2012. And I remember at the time, either like maybe he was there or he had just been to like one of the random stuff, like Hinsdale. Like, he performed in like in the middle of Hinsdale, like downtown Hinsdale or something like that, or Downers Grove, or you know what I mean? Like something like, I forget where it was, but it was like, I was like, David Cassidy? Like, whoa. Because I had seen him in Vegas in a show, in a big like show called EFX.
I remember, because talking about Rick Springfield, he eventually took over that role too. So it's a connection there. Yeah.
Yeah. Originally from Michael Crawford, who's like a big Broadway guy, and like
Yeah.
like a musical theater guy. But so yeah, and he was awesome. Like David Cassidy was awesome. He was so good. And so for me, it's the if I could have anybody's singing voice and singing ability, I'd have this guy's. The like the timbre, and again, and I know he was like at one point they said he was bigger than the Beatles, like in the 70s for like a minute, right? Like
Yeah.
while he's doing Partridge Family, and
He
he was
was huge.
huge.
I mean, you probably weren't old enough to remember. I actually did
Yeah.
live through some of that era. He was huge, dude. Huge.
But then it's like by the time you get to like 81, 82, he's doing a touring production of Jesus Christ Superstar. He's like touring, I think, at one point with Joseph, an amazing like he's doing musicals, like and not even Broadway all the time. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't get like and I think I mean, I know he had a really rough showbiz upbringing. Like his dad was like awful to him. His dad was an actor.
Nightmare. That guy was a nightmare.
Nightmare. And then he didn't like he, like I don't understand if he saw him. I think he saw himself as both an actor and a musician. Didn't have a lot of success as an actor in the 80s. And but like that voice, I'm like, how did he not become like into 80s, 90s? How does he not become a superstar, a vocalist? Is it
You
just
know,
not
that teen idol image is very difficult to shake. I mean, that's also why Rick was trying to avoid getting pigeonholed in that, because that's kind of what happens. You know, if you're stuck with that teen idol thing, you can ride that crest, but you know, it's very few that can use that, like an Elvis or Beatles, to then you lead the audience somewhere else, you know, and you have to have something else to be able to do that, you know, and it's, you know, combine that with him just being young and being overwhelmed. I think any of us would have been overwhelmed by that. And it's like, you know, kind of what do you do from there? So it's a very tricky thing to navigate that and then like, you know, push beyond. I mean, you know, even Peter Frampton, you know, it's phenomenal, like blues guitarist as he is at roots. He got saddled with that same thing too, and it really derailed his career for a long time.
But I saw him years and years and years and years ago. I saw him at Ravinia. You know, and he was amazing, right? And so, but he still headlined Ravinia. Like David.
Who's this?
Frampton.
Frampton. Okay, yeah, just making sure.
Yeah. Like David Cassidy was not headlining Ravinia.
No, he never made that sort of next leap. Yeah, but like to your point, you say, because you've always been a big defender of his and you know, very unique. You know, the kind of that baritone thing, and someone who, you know, he had that squeaky clean image on the Partridge Family.
Yeah.
But then out on the road, he was a hellion, like like he was a legit rocker, and you know, a legit performer too. Someone that if you are actually to see live, he's out there playing guitar and rocking out. You know, that's who he wanted to be so bad. And then you know, the show, he was sort of like weighed down. So it was the show becomes a kind of double-edged sword kind of thing for him. You know,
when I heard I went to like there's like Ron geography. I went to UNLV for a semester. And at the time he was living in Vegas, and I remember someone like a friend of mine, she worked at like a store where he would frequent, and she's like, he's the worst. He's the worst person. He's like entitled. He comes in there, he's like, don't you know who I am? I want my drink right now, whatever it was, you know? And so I wonder too if like that, if he was not worth it, you know, like
could have been difficult
to work with, and like the juice ain't worth the squeeze, you know?
Well, that's the problem too, is that once you've had that sort of early brush with fame, if you still think you're that important, you know, kind of thing, it's like that's, you know, that's I also
I can't imagine having that taken away, you know, but especially when the gift you're given, like the voice, like the timbre, the quality, the range, the expression, you know, like just to listen to his voice, you are listening to something different. Like it's raspy a little bit. It's again a baritone, but it's a very almost like a lyric baritone where it can move up and down really well, and it's not weighed down like a Leonard Cohen or something, right? Who's like a big right. This is like just a very elastic baritone, and like what could this guy not do vocally? And it just didn't. I don't know. It makes you go like, oh, like show business is hard, you know?
Yeah, you know, not everyone kind of sustains for the long haul. So you're gonna get those shooting stars meant for a certain, they're great for that period and stuff like that. And you know, it's but in his case, it is a shame because you know, it was, you know, and then you know, kind of this, you know, ultimately, you know,
sad
kind of sad demise and stuff like that. So
all right, well,
but you know, I enjoyed him too. I enjoyed him too in '70, so I'm glad to give him the nod here.
We'll give him a nod. I'm sure he'll appreciate it wherever he may be.
Sending you love, Dave.
Sending you love, Dave.
All right, so my number 3 another kind of pop sensation, and again, a little bit of that teen idol dumb in the beginning. But they had a lot of talent that have sustained them to this day, and that is the double D, Duran Duran.
That's right. You love Duran Duran.
I do. I love Duran Duran. I always did too. Some of these acts, it was in real time too. It wasn't like rediscoveries. Like Rick Springfield. Whatever I see now, I saw it back then. I just kind of, and I was even amazed then. Like, this guy's not getting quite the credit I think he deserves. And Duran Duran, obviously because of the teen idol boy band, Fab Five, all that sort of early hype.
Yeah.
They're saddled with a bit of that, but also, of course, like as a young guy watching all the MTV videos, I mean, that's like you're loving all of that every second of it. It was they're very savvy. I mean, I can't believe some of these acts, for as young as they were, how smart they were to, because for them it's you kind of think, oh, surface level, good pop act, the 80s and stuff like that, but really beneath it, it was just a very interesting mix because it was, post new wave a little bit too, was what they call the new romantics. So it's a little bit of that synth pop, it's danceable stuff, it's chic kind of like rhythms to it. But then with their guitarist Andy Taylor, he was a legit rock guitar, and when you see them live, he brings a bit of that edge. So yeah, you have the sort of Simon singing on top of that. You have that pop side, but then like Andy's a legit guitarist. I mean, if you ever watch their offshoot, the Power Station, like the Some Like It Hot, if you just listen to that guitar solo in it, he's burning it, so he brought that to it. They had, I think, one of the very best pop bassists of that time, and John Taylor. I still think that real bass line, that's like, that should be required listening and learning for every kind of bass player up and coming. And they were legit. They were really, really good. They brought something fresh. It was a kind of that 80s opulence, excess, but the optimism of that, of, people trying to get away from the bleak, that sort of, especially in England, what had been like, what had given rise to punk, which was all the unemployment and the depression and all that stuff. These guys, they're bringing this kind of fresh, we're young, we're rich, it's all image at first, but then of course the image becomes reality. And much like the Police, they dominated MTV. I mean, you couldn't turn on MTV without watching any of their videos. I mean, one of them was so racy that you only saw it in like dance clubs, Girls on Film. You see the edited version on TV, but yeah, it was a striking package. But again, I think they've sustained, and again, they have built a legit Hall of Fame career, recent Hall of Famers. Yep. And another band that does deliver live. And Simon, I think, is also a great, I think, slightly underrated pop singer too. I don't think anyone's kind of, singing his praises, but I was just watching like just a bootleg, in preparation for this. And, bootleg, like not the best quality audio that you're going to get and stuff like that. I'm like, his voice is actually cutting through that and sounds good in that live setting on top of everything. It's not pitchy. He's hitting the notes, his phrasing, and at the same time, being a commanding leader, front guy. So I think very good, and like I said, did not get their due. It was a lot of, because of course the rock press has got male and macho, and they're gonna slag and act like this off, and it takes for the generation subsequent that actually were impacted by it to, once they take over the press, then you get all the reappraisals later, but they've outlasted their critics, let's put it that way.
See, and along those lines, I'm gonna say I have to say my number 3, because like we're at number 3, right? Okay.
Yeah.
See, because based on that, for the same reason, my number 3. Are you ready for this?
I don't know. Am I?
I don't know. You might yell at me. Linda Ronstadt.
Oh.
In a time where it's all male dominated, right?
Yeah.
She is so skilled and so adaptive and so unique. And like I thought she was a joke. Like I never knew about Linda Ronstadt. I saw a documentary about her recently. And I'm like, she's phenomenal. Like, she's phenomenal. She can do hard rock.
One of the all-time great female voices.
Yeah, pop, contemporary voice. She did opera. She did Gilbert and Sullivan. She did but she could do anything. And
Spanish standards and all that stuff. Standards, yeah.
Right? And so, and I'm like, why did I not know about her as a kid? Like, because it just didn't feel cool to know about her. Like I was like, I just remember she was married to George Lucas at one point.
I know. I know that's probably how you first heard of her. I know her for a little bit because she's always associated with that, you know, Eagles, that kind of
Yeah,
group, like Laurel Canyon group,
yeah,
and giving rise actually to the Eagles, them being her backing band for a while and stuff. And would always see about her in the press, but never really dove deep into the music. It was only like you, I think, years later, and I watching her documentary and just
yeah,
really being impressed by her range and her ability for sure. And she
yeah,
was hanging at a time where it was like again male dominated, to be part of the boys and kind of running the boys club and stuff. And apparently she could hang.
yeah, yeah. She could hang. Yeah, she did a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean she could hold her own too. That's
Yeah,
she. So she was legit.
right on. All right, who's your number three?
Well, I did my number three. We're kind of
Oh,
doing that way. I'm ahead of you. So we're jumping right to my number two.
here it is.
And this is an act that I'm long overdue talking about, but I'm happy to. It is the 80s era, the Phil Collins led era of Genesis.
Yes,
And this is a group that still
yes.
to this day, if you read any of like the rock press, they will still praise the Peter Gabriel era of Genesis at the expense of the Phil Collins era of Genesis.
This is my
I've always
era. Just so you know,
Yeah,
this is my era.
same. And you know what? I've always been one to say it, and I've been seeing more and more of this actually online. I've seen others say this stuff too. Particularly Glenn Alloway has a channel, and he talks about this. But I always thought that the best thing that actually happened to Genesis was when they parted ways with Peter Gabriel. It was the best thing that ever happened to Peter Gabriel as well, because I
Definitely.
loved their separate output. Like I love the 80s Genesis catalog, and I love all of Peter Gabriel's solo career. Even though I didn't grow up with the proggy 70s era of Genesis that like the Genesis purists, uphold, I've gone back to try and do reappraisals of that or just try to listen to it. And I find a lot of it unlistenable. I just cannot get into it for the life of me. Aside from one or two Hallmark songs here and there, I just cannot get into it. I don't know if it's just a little too much English whimsy. I don't know what it is. Maybe just the prog doesn't quite land for me the same way that maybe
Yeah,
Yes and Yes and Pink Floyd do. But I cannot get into it for the life of me. But like I think once Phil took over, and again, I think it benefits for me that I grew up during that era. But I just sonically I prefer that. I prefer the concision, of the songs, and with Phil kind of singing on top of it. And Phil's an amazing talent, another very
yeah.
underrated guy. I think as a trio, they're underrated as far as a collective of songwriters. And they were produced by one of my favorite producers of the '80s, if not of all time, Hugh Padgham, who also produced concurrently. Like he was, one year it'd be these guys, and then the Police, and then Genesis, then flip flop. He produced some of Peter Gabriel's albums as well, and just a great in-demand producer at that time. He was like one of the top guys you went to. That run from like Duke through to the Invisible Touch album, I love all those albums, and I'm very partial to those, and I think they're greatly underrated in the larger canon because again, a lot of people, if you're one of those purists, Genesis
Okay.
purists, you're into the sort of the proggy thing, and you think Phil destroyed the band after, which I greatly disagree with.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, like I said, like that's the Genesis I know. And seeing documentaries about like the Peter Gabriel era with the masks and the costumes, and it's like to me it's a different band altogether.
It is, not to say that it was bad, but I think it would
Right.
have been benefited us to like have maybe grown up for it. Maybe the impact would have been greater, because within its time. But we know all the mega Genesis hits, like I
Yeah.
said, from like, once you get to Follow You, Follow Me, Misunderstanding, and then, all that stuff, from then on. And I still find those albums so damn listenable.
Yeah.
Like I said, Abacab is one of my favorites. The self-titled Genesis album, just great stuff.
Some people are like I've met over the years people that are triggered by Phil Collins's voice. And
Yeah, I think and I've always found that strange too. Some people are like,
yeah,
love it or loathe it kind of thing. But I
right.
think it's a very elastic, and beautiful instrument.
Yeah.
But some people just don't like, because I could see Phil also suffered from an image problem because he was just too ubiquitous in the '80s, and and after a while, it became a little too camp. He relied a little too much on the charm at the expense of, because he does have an edge. Like
Yeah.
if you listen to a song like Mama from Genesis, I mean, that has a kick-ass edge to it. In the Air Tonight, his most famous song. I mean, that's not a tender, loving
Right.
lyric. That is
Right.
a cold, brutal lyric when you, you listen to
Yeah.
it. So he has the romantic side, but he does have an edge to him, you know. And I've appreciated that. And what ties it all together, he's one of those ultra gifted melodicists, you know.
Yeah.
He just he has that gift for sure for a tune.
Yeah. 100%. Big fan. Okay, so I'm with you on that. My number two, y'all ready for this? So my number two, I think they fall more into the 90s, like early 90s. They hit it big, but they're coming out of the 80s. Melissa Etheridge. And I I love her voice. I love her writing. I love to me, she is the female. That sounds terrible, but to me, she is the female like comparable to Springsteen. And
Yeah.
there's like uh there's a version like I've seen like on YouTube like a version of the two of them singing Thunder Road from like the
Mm-hmm.
90s, and like I mean I can't stop listening to the two of them singing Thunder Road. Like it's just her voice, so much soul, so much raspiness, so much like if I want I say that I bring her up because I'm like I wish she had headlined or fronted a band in the 70s and 80s, you know, and been like the Roger
Man,
Daltrey
she had
or
been perfect for that.
right.
Oh man, like her whole approach would lends itself to that era, and her like fronting, man, it would have been great, you know.
Singer-songwriter 70s coming out of New York or whatever. You know, I understand Boston, right? But like, but you know what I'm saying? Like, if she came out of like that period that's coming out of the big anthem stuff, like that where it's like the more singer-songwriter stuff, like, oh, it would have been amazing.
Yeah, and again, the thing that sticks with me about her is definitely the voice, like that
Yeah.
raspiness. You know, it's like, you know, very few have, you have your Rod Stewarts and, you know, people like that too, and um, but yeah, she had that. I think that was her greatest gift for sure, because it's something that you put that on the radio, you know it's her. You're not confusing that for
Yeah.
any other ingenue or, you know, any other pop
Right.
starlet like that. It has grit. It has
Right.
she
For that
she,
reason.
she has the rock edge to her.
Yeah. Like I was astonished. Like when I really thought about the same, I was like, I don't know that many. Like, why don't I know? Like I'm not like Whitney Houston. I'm not like I wasn't a fan of Whitney Houston. Like she's phenomenal, but like
Mhm.
Mariah Carey, I didn't like sit and listen to these people. You know, like
Yeah.
I never like that. It's never like it never called me. Melissa Etheridge, I'm just like God. I just it's so engaging and it's so consistent with the other stuff that I love. You know, so that's why I'm
Mhm.
like I feel like I wish she'd had that opportunity to be like up there with the greats. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, great to give her due. And she's a name. It's funny because I think I must have seen like somebody react to her video recently, or I
Mm.
must have heard like her song recently on the radio, and it felt like a blast from the past kind of thing. And you kind of wonder, like, because I don't know. I really haven't kept up. I don't really know
Right.
what she's been up to. I just haven't heard from her in a while. And it was like, oh, okay.
I'll tell her to call you because yeah, she knows she asks about you all the time.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right.
All right, here
So
we
my
go.
number one, baby, and I think this has to be the most misunderstood, misjudged, maligned in their time pop group sensation. And of course, it had to be the Monkees.
I knew it.
Yeah, it had to be the Monkees, because, you know, when you talk about misunderstood, you talk about critics crapping all over something without understanding it. You know, while at the same time, sort of being this sensation, especially at their peak. You can't get, you know, a better example of that than the Monkees. You know, because obviously, you know, this was the first time I think that really something of this level, a hybrid television rock and roll project had been attempted. Um, and you know, it's a strange thing, because a lot of it, the confusion was intentional on the part of the producers. You know, Bert Snyder and Bob Rafelson, because they were trying to sort of blend the lines between reality and fantasy so that people bought into it, right? But of course, that becomes a problem, because then critics later on, when they find out that these guys weren't discovered as a real group,
Right.
you know,
They auditioned, yeah.
that was actually a process of, you know, manufacturing this group initially. You know, they're kind of like, they feel like the rug's been pulled out under them and like, you know, something sneaky, underhanded. So part of it was a miscalculation on the part of the producer's part. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, it's a stigma that still follows the group to this day. I mean, these guys, it's criminal. They're still not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And by any criteria that you judge it by, there's been other acts that, you know, have had other writers and other, you know, players on their records. You know, I mean, you could, any criteria that you would think that what's the reason they're not, other acts have been in there. So it's just, it's a big sticking point, you know, as to why they're not in. And this is a group too that has had, I think, probably next to the Beatles, probably the most impact in terms of influencing fans to form their own garage groups, you know, because
Yeah.
they're perpetuating the dream that was first put forth by the Beatles in A Hard Day's Night in Hell of like the group that lives together and chases girls and have adventures and are trying to make it and all that kind of stuff, you know. But beneath, you know, all the veneer and the facade, you had Mickey Dolenz, Davy Jones, two of the best pop singers of their era, especially particularly Mickey Dolenz. You know,
I was gonna say, yeah, if we're talking about singer, like, and that guy was like friends with Lennon and Harry Nilsson, and like that's like it blows my mind. Because I just saw him as the Monkees guy, but like he was a rocker.
He almost became a drummer for Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention. You know, he just couldn't get out of his contract, so he was, you know,
Wow.
he kind of was in the right circles and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think by his peers he's respected. It was just like with critics, but you know, someone I still think doesn't. I think he gets a little more credit now than before. But one of the great pop voices, like of all those, you know, those great Monkees hits, you know.
Oh yeah.
You got Peter Tork, like multi-instrumentalist, you know, and then someone who was really the most dedicated to the idea of keeping them as a group. Mike Nesmith, who I think is still one of the probably the most underrated songwriters. Like he has so many gems from that Monkees catalog that he wrote that I think don't quite get their due. And you know, they did everything that a real group. They eventually did everything that a real group does.
Right.
You know,
tour.
They recorded, they performed live. You know, they toured. So they've done it all, and I think they've done it all. You know, like no one's. You know, they were able to do a lot of what other people do. Not a lot of other groups could do that combination of what they do, which is also to have the charisma to be an on-camera presence, carry a TV show, you know, and have the larger than life personality. So always greatly misjudged, and it's like these guys, you know, they almost get more mileage now out of not being in the Hall of Fame than being in it, you know. But you know, but it's long overdue, and it's a shame, you know, and definitely, like I said, top group in terms of misjudged and done dirty by critics in their time.
100%.
For you, number one.
So I originally had a number one, but now I'm changing it last minute.
That's so unlike you, Ron.
I go with the flow, Bruce.
Spontaneous direction, yeah.
I go with the flow because the more we're in this now, my first one doesn't seem applicable because I don't think he was done dirty. So Ian Gillan, right? Like Ian Gillan from Deep Purple, sick voice, amazing live performer, amazing recording artist, like very prolific solo career too. Like solid amount of hits, like solid amount of albums. Like he's just great. Like did a lot of cool things, right? Still performing. I don't think he's underrated anymore. I'm gonna say Harry Nilsson.
Harry Nilsson's a great choice.
Harry Nilsson's my number one because he was the artist, you know, like the comedian's comedian, right? Like they all worshipped him. Like Lennon was like, this guy is the next big thing. And I don't know if his songs were too eclectic or too quirky or whatever, but I don't think he ever got to the level that he, in the inner circles, he was like the alpha, right? He was, and I don't think collectively in the zeitgeist, he ever got to that place.
No, you're right. Like if you ever read anything about like 70s era and like any thing about Lennon, obviously, Lost Weekend and all that stuff. I mean, you know, Harry Nilsson figures prominently. Monkees too, you know, like Mickey Dolenz, you know, paid lots of homage to him, especially on the last Monkey studio album, you know. So yeah, he's someone by artist, you know, like you said, within that circle, so respected, almost like a Graham Parsons in that sense of like, you know, someone who, you know, again, like, you know, in his case, the Stones, you know, thought the world of him and so many others. So I agree. Like he's someone that I think as didn't break through, you know, as a sort of singer songwriter that people felt he should. But among his fans, I mean, he's got that really dedicated following. And again, among artists, he's very, very highly regarded. I mean, without you, I mean, how many times has that been covered?
Right. To me, I like I had to sing that song on stage, like in a show, and it was rough, man. It was like that is a hard song, like living up there. So it's like I mean, yeah, the songs are so quality. Like my introduction to him, like I think a lot of people maybe or maybe not, but for me, I the first time I heard him was or heard any of his songs that I was consciously aware of was I'm starting to Reservoir Dogs, right? Put the
Mhm.
lime in the coconut and shake the bowl up. That's in it's like
Yeah.
it's in there's a scene there right where I think it's where he's cutting the ear off and that song's playing. And that song stuck with me my whole life. And I sing it for my kid all the time. I play it for my kid. It stuck with her. Like the song's just like glued to your ear. You know, they're just like they like live inside you rent free. And that's I think a sign of a phenomenal writer and a phenomenal executor as well, you know, is that he's so iconic in my brain and like yeah, he never went over like a Lennon or even Mickey Dolenz. So that's my
Yeah.
number one.
Solid choice. Man,
Thank
good
you.
props on that one. Yeah, because that's
Thank
the
you.
name from the
You didn't see
past,
it
but
coming.
I didn't see it coming. That was a pleasant surprise for sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good call,
Well,
Ron.
there it
There we
is.
go.
We got through it.
We did indeed. So yeah, we'd love to hear from anyone who has like the two or three of you who've bothered sticking with us through this whole video and have opinions as far as your most underrated or misjudged or underappreciated pop stars, rock acts, singers. I would love to hear what you have to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, write down your comments. Be sure to like and subscribe. And if you get a chance, watch all of Bruce's videos. It's not only the good looks. I mean, there's a lot of it is the good looks, but it's the brilliance. This guy knows his stuff. I feel like I always walk away with a PhD in musicology, music history.
Well, I'm glad we were able to do this, Ron.
I know this feels like it feels like what was it Revenge of the Skywalker or fuck that last. It feels like we're cramming into one last adventure, you know.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, but anyway, hopefully everyone, you know, stuck with us, enjoyed it. Like I said, share your thoughts, and we'll see you again next time. Take care, everyone.
Take care.